Israeli music today is not easily defined due to its diverse influences and comprehensive mix of instrumentation and rhythms. Within contemporary Israeli popular music, one particularly influential subgenre is Mizrahi or Eastern music. This genre refers to music created by artists of Mizrahi or Middle Eastern Jewish origins, incorporating sounds of the Levant as well as diasporic regions from whence they hail, throughout the Middle East, North Africa, and Central Asia. Within this category, Yemenite traditions play a significant role from contributing rhythms and melodies, and perhaps most notably the famed silsulim or vocal trills, commonly found in traditional Yemenite music, as well as the music of Israeli singers of Yemenite origin. This film will examine the evolution of Yemenite influence on Israeli music, focusing specifically on its revival in the 1980s. The 1980s revival of Yemenite music demonstrates how artists solidified their influence into the mainstream by refusing to restrict themselves to one genre of authentic Israeli music. Rather, artists like Haim Moshe challenged this notion of authenticity by unapologetically incorporating Yemenite elements into his discography that also included pop songs and Mediterranean music. There's no consensus on the definition of Yemenite music, whether it's comprised of songs created by singers of Yemenite origin, made by artists who had to have lived in Yemen at one point, or simply music that is inspired by Yemenite musical aspects. For the purpose of this film, Yemenite music will refer to songs created by singers of Yemenite origin that include musical influences and contributions either created or commonly found in Yemen. Additionally, this film will center artists' intent and perspective in order to highlight the dynamic nature of Yemenite musical evolution in mainstream Israeli culture. In this age, it is so important to uplift the voices of historically marginalized people, including Mizrahi and specifically Yemenite artists, within the Israeli context. Many scholars are not of the community in focus, and as a result, misrepresent the community and the music created. As such, I think it is important to focus on the voice of the artists themselves, as they are the experts in the music and the culture that inspired their work. Jews had lived in Yemen since ancient times. In the late 1800s, some of the Yemenite Jewish community began immigrating to Israel, primarily for religious purposes of reconnecting with the Jewish homeland. This continued throughout the first half of the 20th century until the vast influx in 1949. This group of roughly 50,000 arrived in Israel as refugees following the ethnic cleansing and intimidation that occurred after the 1948 Israeli War of Independence. Today, there are around 400,000 Jews in Israel with Yemenite origins. From the 1930s, Yemenite artists such as Bracha Zefira and Shoshana Damari found success in collaborating with Ashkenazi composers, like Max Reinhardt and Moshe Wilensky, to blend traditional Yemenite folk songs with European piano arrangements. Shoshana Damari achieved notoriety for her songs that incorporated Yemenite stories and musical elements with European arrangements and spoke of a longing to return to Zion, as exemplified in her song Miriam Bat Nisim. Her song Kalaniot, meaning red anemones, also gained popularity due to its comparison of the red flower to the red berets of British paratroopers who were targets of the Jewish liberation movement. This even resulted in an alleged shutdown of a theater performance by British authorities who perceived this song as endangering their troops by stirring up members of the Zionist movement. At the same time, some critics, such as Menashe Ravina, viewed this new mix of sonic cultures as a betrayal of the Yemenite music's authenticity. While many of these folk songs were appreciated, the obsession with authenticity created an obstacle for Yemenite artists by placing them in an Orientalist time capsule and not giving them room to continuously develop their sound in the same way artists of other genres could. This problem persisted throughout generations. As the Israeli music industry developed following the establishment of the State of Israel, Mizrahi singers had trouble achieving mainstream success. Many continued to view them through a Eurocentric prism, and their music was not considered authentically Israeli. Part of this was due to the fact that the lyrics were often sang in Arabic, and due to the ongoing Arab-Israeli conflict, this was politicized. Now that we have an understanding of the historical context, let's shift to the period of the revival of Yemenite music in the 1970s and 80s. By the 1970s, some artists of Yemenite origin, for example, Ofra Chaza and Haim Moshe, broke through with mainstream hits that fit in with the Israeli popular sound. For example, Ofra Chaza's Chai. These successes gave them a platform to create Mizrahi and more specifically Yemenite music and release it to a larger audience, providing representation for their community. This, however, was not an easy process, as the stigma surrounding the authenticity of Mizrahi music within an Israeli context persisted. This pushback came primarily from Ashkenazi critics from outside of the community. Additionally, radio stations were managed by primarily Ashkenazim who did not play Mizrahi music. Renowned Mizrahi composer of Yemenite origin, Avihu Medina, spoke to what he views as an unfair standard in 1989, stating, "Why do they ask us to be authentic? Authenticity never interested me. I want to create a song for people to use that comes out of their own experience, and not out of some tribal archaeology." He also expressed that Mizrahi, and more specifically songs deemed Yemenite, should be considered equally Israeli as music influenced geographically by Europe. He recognized the unique Israeli context in which sounds are blended together while still incorporating the artist's backgrounds. One example of someone who did this successfully would be singer Haim Moshe. Born in 1955 in Ramat HaSharon, Israel, to Yemenite immigrants, he became popular in the early 1980s, singing Mizrahi and Mediterranean music. Some of his songs reflect strong Yemenite sonic influences, while others are more generically Mediterranean or even Greek influenced. Though music throughout the Mediterranean and into Western Asia shares many similarities from scales to rhythmic patterns, certain aspects are notably reminiscent of particular countries and regions. For example, some of Haim Moshe's music incorporates ensembles of bongos, darbukas, which are goblet drums, and riks, which are similar to tambourines but found in the Middle East, that play rhythms that follow specific Yemenite time signatures. For example, in the intro to his performance of Yemenite Step, you can hear a consistent rik as well as a deep thumping of tom drums that are reminiscent of bongos, rather than a solo darbuka being the main source of percussion. Some of the Greek-inspired songs also incorporate the darbuka, which is found throughout the Middle East and Mediterranean, but not in a Yemenite time signature. Additionally, they're coupled with Greek instruments such as the bouzouki, which is a stringed guitar-like instrument, or even guitars themselves playing in the plucked style of a bouzouki. These distinctions are noticeable throughout Haim Moshe's discography, and a listener can hear the variations from song to song when listening to Haim Moshe's Hits of Gold collection. Throughout his career, he shifted between these different styles, as well as singing Shirei Haaretz, or songs of the land of Israel, and mainstream Israeli pop. One song that catapulted him to fame was his 1982 hit Ahavat Chayai, meaning love of my life.
رقديني رقدي دمعت محولها النوريم حبيبي على زعيمانو بس محاها برون الحق قدول هو لانو حبت لدها شرون.
When listening to this song, certain Yemenite influences are apparent. He sings with pronounced Yemenite vocal trills, better known as silsulim in Hebrew, as well as Yemenite pronunciation of Hebrew over a drum machine rhythm that is commonly found in traditional Yemenite music, as well as across West Asian music. These silsulim are one of the definitive features of Yemenite music that have influenced artists throughout the years into the modern day. Another influential song for Haim Moshe was his 1982 hit, Linda. This song became popular not only in Israel, but throughout the Arab world, especially in the Levantine countries of Lebanon and Syria. Moshe even received fan mail from the aforementioned countries. If the Syrian people requested, do you think Israeli singers would come to perform for us personally? I'm trying to learn Hebrew so I can understand the words to all your beautiful songs. I ask God that an agreement will be reached between our two countries so that we will be able to see you. What do you feel when a Syrian person writes to you? This song is significant because it was sung in Arabic, unlike the previous song in Hebrew. Despite the Levantine appeal of the song, the Southern Arabian influence was also heavily present. The improvisational nature of the beginning section of the song includes vocals as well as sparse instrumentation. This style of instrumentation is common throughout Arabic language music, but not necessarily throughout the entirety of the Mediterranean and Middle East. Furthermore, the silsulim make another appearance in this section of the song, demonstrating the Levantine Yemenite fusion Haim Moshe often brought. While these songs contributed to Haim Moshe's fame and earned him performances on TV programs, they did not necessarily represent a broken glass ceiling in terms of widespread commercial success. Often dismissed as cassette music, due to cassette tapes being the perceived main source of distribution rather than radio, Mizrahi music, including Yemenite music, was still on the cultural periphery to many in the industry. This term cassette music refers to its underground status and perception of it being cheap and underproduced, due to the fact that cassettes are cheaper to cut than vinyl records and can even record straight off of the radio illegally. Nevertheless, this did not deter Haim Moshe from embracing his success and the fan base that felt as if his music represented their communities. He speaks about this in an early performance.
מי הקהל שקונה אותך? מי הקהל שאוהב אותך להערכתך?
מי הקהל שאוהב אותי? זה קהל שאוהב אותי. הרבה צעירים, הרבה מבוגרים גם. והמון מעדות המזרח.
לא מושמעים מספיק, שהם לא מקבלים תמיכה מספיק מהממסד.
לי אין את הטענה הזאת. אותי משמיעים הרבה, אני שומע הרבה, ואין לי את הטענה הזאת.
As explained, he did not restrict himself, and simply identified those who supported his music as those who support my music. However, in the end, he did not shy away from the fact that many of his supporters were the young and old of Eastern origin. Furthermore, he embraced the fact that his music was sold successfully on cassette tapes, and that contributed to his widespread reach. Throughout his career, he experimented with other styles, including Shirei Haaretz, which is songs of the land of Israel that represent the folk culture of early labor Zionist pioneers and settlers. He also made Greek-inspired songs, reminiscent of the work of Aris San. In a special program with Khan 11, he explains that this is due to his upbringing, hearing different styles.
כיוון שאני גדלתי על מוזיקה, בוא נגיד אפילו ישראלית, פלוס תימנית ופלוס אפילו יוונית.
In the 1960s, Greek music began to gain popularity in Israel, with artists such as Aris San, who was himself a Greek immigrant, rising to fame. He represented a Mediterranean character that many in Israel related to, including Mizrahi singers. Artists such as Yehuda Poliker, a Greek Jewish Israeli singer, carried on the legacy of Greek music into the 1980s. This influence played a role in the development of the Mizrahi music genre within Israel, specifically within Haim Moshe's career, by creating space for additional regional fusion that challenged the limits of perceived authenticity. In his song Zesiman, he relies heavily on a bouzouki, a Greek stringed instrument similar to the Middle Eastern oud, and sings with less prominent silsulim. And then in his 1992 hit Hakolot Shel Pireos, The Voices of Pireos, he even includes direct references in the lyrics to how the voices of Pireus, Greece, remind him of Haifa, Israel. While this song is definitely Greek-influenced, he is sure to clarify that it is reflective of his geographic environment of the Mediterranean as a whole, stating that it doesn't have to be the voices of Pireus, but could have easily been a song about Israel with a few changes in the lyrics.
הוא לא נשמע יווני בכלל, לא. אני הייתי קורא לו שיר שאפילו נכתב פה, גם איך שאני מציג אותו בכלל. אני מציג אותו ישראלי.
הפיראוס הזה היה יכול להיות כל מקום אחר גם.
נכון.
The diversity of his discography assisted his rise to mainstream popularity and ability for fans of all backgrounds to relate to his music. While nowadays some view him as a singer for everyone, this was not always the case. In 1986, he spoke about the backlash he received from some of his original fans following his diversification. My friends say to me, Haim, you're exaggerating. You're running out on us. You will soon be an Ashkenazi. Just when we have found a good singer in our style, you turn to another style. They want me with them, to keep the style for them, to keep up the standards, so that Mizrahi music will receive the honor it deserves. My roots are black, real black. I am and will always be Haim Moshe with the Yemenite accent, the jargon, and the admiration for the Oriental culture. Although his work did not always reflect others' perception of Yemenite music, he demonstrated that he always felt connected to his cultural background, thus exemplifying a way one could circumvent perceived restrictive labels and limits placed on Yemenite music. His consistent success and continued respect within the Mizrahi and more specifically Yemenite music genre demonstrates his ability to outlast his critics while also maintaining a diverse repertoire that allowed him mainstream recognition as well as acknowledgement of Yemenite roots. The impact of his work is reflective of what the 1980s revival meant as a whole. Artists from this time period like Haim Moshe and Ofra Chaza paved the way for the current generation of pop artists to embrace Yemenite culture and combine it with contemporary Israeli pop music. From Tel Aviv pride anthems that cite the Yemenite Tzilzulim as an essential aspect of the Israeli musical fabric, to Iowa's unique blend of hip-hop production and Yemenite Arabic lyrics and rhythms to tell the story of their grandparents' journey from Yemen to Israel, and the discrimination they faced in the Ma'abarot transit camps. The struggle of Yemenite artists to break the glass ceiling and weave their sound into the sonic tapestry of Israel paid off. The types of songs that would have been dismissed as inauthentic or cassette music are now chart toppers. As a result of singers utilizing their agency and normalizing their sound, the current generation does not have to face the same set of obstacles as their forerunners. The revival of Yemenite music in the 1980s offers a snapshot of a key moment in the history of Israeli music, and specifically Mizrahi music, in which the power of the industry and media elite that was predominantly left-wing Ashkenazi was minimized as a result of what was popular among the people. And decades later, we see the way they were forced to embrace the multifaceted nature of artists who freely incorporate the sounds of their diasporic origins with a contemporaneous mainstream. The presence of Yemenite influence in pop music demonstrates the significance of the 1980s revival of Yemenite music. Artists like Shoshana Damari and Bracha Zefira brought the Yemenite voice into the Israeli musical consciousness in spite of cultural resistance throughout the early and mid-20th century. Singers throughout the 1980s, such as Ofra Chaza and Haim Moshe, demonstrated how they could continue to elevate Yemenite musical contributions while also exploring other genres of pop music, and ultimately helped create the conditions where Yemenite influence and pop music are synonymous. Modern artists who sing with Yemenite vocal inflections over dance pop beats are not questioned on authenticity in the same manner that Avihu Mendina mentioned. When singers like Iowa tell stories of their Yemenite ancestors over hip-hop tinged beats full of Yemenite rhythms, they are telling authentic stories without conforming to the Orientalist conventions of outsiders. Haim Moshe's career is an example of the way in which the 1980s reflects a time when the foundation was laid for these modern artists to succeed. Rather than stick to the constructs of non-Yemenite critics on what his music should have sounded like, he was unafraid to engage in different genres, as well as cultural fusion that represented his Yemenite origins in the context of Israel and the Mediterranean. His work demonstrated how Yemenite music was not a time capsule nor a relic of the past, but a dynamic element of Israeli musical culture, and the legacy he left can still be felt today.
Imere yago nasal sel koli
כותבים לו גרון, הנגן שירי, סובו סובו המעגלים, צעד תימני, צעד חינני, זה הקצב בא ממני, עמו הטובים, והקו עד יישמע השיר. שירו נא איתי עד שיעלה, יעלה השחר על העיר. שירו נא איתי עד שנגלה, נגלה כוחו של זה השיר. שירו, נגנו בקול אדיר עד כלות אחרון המתרים, כי ניגון ערב מחמם הלב, זה הזמר בא ממני, עמו מתרים ונגנו עד יישמע השיר. עם מרתוגה סלסל קולי עד שיעלמו העצובים, ושיר יגע בין המתרים של זוגות האוהבים. זמר תימני, זמר חינני, זה הזמר בא ממני, עמו מתרים ונגנו עד יישמע השיר. שירו נא איתי עד שיעלה, יעלה השחר על העיר. שירו נא איתי עד שנגלה, נגלה כוחו של זה השיר. שירו, נגנו בקול אדיר עד כלות אחרון המתרים, כי ניגון ערב